Today, I'm joined by Dr. Bill Bruno, a world-renowned plastic surgeon whose career has taken him to some of the finest medical facilities on the planet. Nearly a decade ago, Dr. Bruno faced a wake-up call. A coronary artery calcium scan revealed signs of heart disease. And rather than relying solely on pharmaceuticals, he chose to overhaul his lifestyle, focusing on nutrition, fitness, and stress management. His experience sparked a profound passion for preventative medicine, wellness, and longevity, which he's going to share with us today. Welcome. Can I call you Bill, or do I call you Dr. Bruno?
No, Bill is fine. Thank you, Nadine. I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As I said offline, this is a real passion of mine as well, something that I'm super interested in. I'm interested in the practices myself, and just I love the fact that you're sharing this message, because there are so many simple things that we can do that can have a massive impact on our health and on our health span, right? Which is
Right.
something that you talk about. Do you want to start with your story, your experience, and how you got to this place where you're promoting this stuff?
Yeah, just a brief background about me. I'm a practicing plastic surgeon here in Los Angeles, and about 8, 9 years ago, I discovered I had high cholesterol on a routine blood test, which led to some testing, which led to, as you mentioned in the intro, a coronary artery calcium scan. And for the viewers, that's basically a CAT scan of the heart,
Okay.
where they don't have to inject any contrast, and it gives you an image. And they look for calcifications, which are signs of atherosclerosis or plaque in the coronary vessels. And at the time, I was, I believe, 49 years old. I had a very high amount of plaque, which led to another test called the CT angiogram, where they do inject some contrast, and that gives you a really good image of any degree of blockage in the vessels. So essentially, instead of just taking, a statin to lower my cholesterol, I decided to do lifestyle changes, and I took a deep dive into nutrition and exercise, and I became, I guess you'd say, vegan, or like 99%, plant-based at that time, while I was reevaluating everything, and just tried to do more lifestyle interventions. I guess you'd say I wasn't really overweight, but I was like cardio metabolically unhealthy, almost like skinny fat, I guess what you or the listeners might identify with. And yeah, so over this past 8 or 9 years, I started sharing these strategies and tactics with my plastic surgery patients, because I realized, at least here in America, a lot of patients, they're not getting this from their primary care doctors. They're not getting advice about nutrition and sleep and exercise and stress management. So I started doing a lot more wellness posts on this. Then I created a digital course on how to create your own longevity blueprint, where it's like pre-recorded content of videos that goes into it. And then I created a coaching program to help people with their body composition. I call it the body recomposition formula. So that's just a quick sort of summary of how I got to where I'm at now. And I love doing plastic surgery, but I realized, people come to me, they want to look good, but what they really also probably need is, how do I live better and live longer? Because, it's one thing to look good, but I also couldn't help but give them advice, because I'm a doctor first and foremost and a plastic surgeon second. I want to give them advice on how to, extend their health span, as you mentioned earlier, which is the quality of your life, along with your lifespan, which is the length of your life.
Amazing. I think that that's a really interesting point that you made. Just about people going in for, coming to you for their aesthetics, but that you actually started to see that there was a need for the other side of things, because really, to get the most benefit out of those things, you need both, right? Well,
Yeah, and
you
I
might
couldn't.
argue that you don't need plastic surgery, but
No, well, I think, I would say this: if someone can improve their health, they will also end up looking better. If
yes.
someone loses fat, gains muscle, sleeps better, the aesthetics will follow the healthy life.
Mm.
Although some people come to me and they're like, look, I just want a tummy tuck. I get that, but along the way, I'm like, yeah, I think you should be doing this, or you could think about eating this way. So it's something where some people, they don't necessarily say, I want to live longer, but I think most people do. They're
Mm.
just not thinking in those terms.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that well, I love the fact that you have chosen this path because often people don't realize that they have this um, myriad of options to take control of their own health. When you had your all of your tests and you found that you had calcification, um, no doubt there was a little bit of, well, shock, fear, worry about what was
Yeah,
happening. And the option that you were given was medication. Was there,
right.
yeah, was there any indication that lifestyle, like, were you given any recommendations with that?
Not really. I think the traditional recommendations like limit your red meat
Right.
consumption, eat less salt. But
Mm,
beyond that, no, not really. And I'm not saying that there isn't a role for medication, because
mm,
depending on your degree of disease, I think there is a role for cholesterol lowering medications in the right cases. But yeah, I mean, at least in the United States, there's really little to no education in medical school on nutrition as it stands. And I went to medical school 30 years ago, but even now, I believe it's about 20% of med schools have, and it's only a few hours. It's like 4 or 5 hours on strange things like scurvy, how to prevent, these diseases that we don't really have anymore, but you just have to know them for a test question or like a
yeah.
weird, vitamin deficiency. So hopefully that's changing or is about to change maybe. Uh, in the United States, medical education system. But no, to your question, it was just really, here's a drug or here's a class of drugs, and that was it. And I just really took it upon myself and sort of went really deep into the nutrition. And even more recently, just the more I learn, I've evolved. I've reintroduced like pasture raised eggs, I think are okay. Grass fed beef, I feel is okay for me. But I get my blood checked every quarter, so I'm looking at these things, and that's something I would share with people: is don't guess,
Mm,
test, right? That's the saying. Like, don't just go to the doctor once a year, get your blood work done. They say it's quote unquote normal. See you next year. I think if you're making changes and you're adding foods, you're adding anything to your program, reevaluate and just, be proactive. Go to your doctor, bring this information to your doctor and say, hey, what about this medication? What about this blood test? Or, should I be getting a calcium artery, a CT scan, which I think anyone over 40 should be getting that, because just to remind the audience, heart disease is the number one killer of men and women in the US and in the world. So I'm sure in Australia the same.
mm.
So sorry to ramble on like that.
No, 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 it's great. Can you share with us before we sort of kick in, and we're going to go through some of the recommendations that you give in your free ebook and in the course that you've created? We're going to kind of dive into some of those practices and how we can start to take control of our lifestyle and our health. But can you give us a kind of a comparison where you were at? What was your lifestyle like when you found out you had coronary artery disease, if that's, or calcification, compared to what your practices are like now, and how you feel and what the results have been? So just a big question, but I kind of want to,
Yeah.
give people this sense of what we're actually capable of.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, I guess I was eating a typical standard American diet, lots of ultra processed food, um, lots of high sugar, starch food, eating out a lot. Um, wasn't really doing any structured, exercise or, weight training, or wasn't even thinking about tracking steps or anything like that. Wasn't taking sleep seriously, would go to sleep, fall asleep at midnight or 1 in the morning watching television, um, and just those basics there of nutrition, exercise, sleep, just totally disrespecting all of them. and I wasn't getting testing done. And it was this one cholesterol test at the age of 49 that led me to the calcium scan, that led me to the CT angiogram. And prior to that, I probably had my blood checked in over 10 or 15 years, because as they say, doctors are usually the worst patients. So I just was neglecting it. But yeah, to answer your question, that's kind of where I was. And now it's completely different, wearing an Oura ring, being mindful, tracking sleep, tracking steps, weight training 3 or 4 times a week, being really mindful about my food. Even though I'm not vegan anymore, I'd say I'm probably 80% plant-based, and eating more whole foods and trying to avoid a lot of the ultra processed foods that we have here, as well as I'm sure you have, in Australia as well, and trying to now minimize seed oils and vegetable oil, things that weren't even on my radar 8, 9 years ago that are now routine. And I think it's those daily choices that I made that became habits. I think that's really what longevity is. It's not fancy technology. It's the daily choices you make. And we can all do this. And a lot of it is um, relatively inexpensive or free, getting morning sunlight. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. Increasing your step count, walking for 10 or 15 minutes after each meal. These are all things that, like, we can all do now that are easy to implement. It just takes a while to develop those habits. But yeah, to your question, that was a transitional period where I was like just eating and eating, like I was eating, you know, sweets and eating chicken tenders and, eating the diet of a child at times. And, being a doctor, you're eating in hospital cafeterias a lot as a resident, late hours, horrible eating practices, which just sort of bled over into my late 30s and into my 40s. But nonetheless, now that I'm aware of that, I've changed it. So I hope that helps answer the question.
Yes, definitely. And in terms of the results that you have from a health perspective, have you reversed that calcification?
So I did get the study repeated about 7 years later, the CT angiogram, and it's all stabilized.
Okay.
So when they did these CT angiograms 8 years ago, they didn't have the advantage of AI. So now it's called a clearly scan. So it uses AI, and it can actually tell you with a lot more certainty what degree of stenosis you have, like 28% blockage of this particular coronary vessel. And my soft plaques, which are the unstable plaques, a lot of them have converted to hard plaques, which are more stable. And I have to credit the plant-based diet and the lifestyle changes for that. And this is a test I'll probably repeat in another, 4 to 5 years. But a lot of my inflammatory markers and things like that have improved and have come down. And, as far as body composition, I get a DEXA scan a couple times a year. So looking into that, increasing muscle mass, decreasing body fat and visceral fat. So yeah, there are tests and markers to assess that. But also, yeah, the way I feel is much better, sleeping better. So there's subjective things and objective markers that have all proved that these are having benefits. And yeah, I feel at 57, I feel and look probably as good as I have in, I don't know, a long time.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, let's talk about lifestyle. I'm just looking at my notes. What will I go? Where will I go? And genetics. Because I think also, well, I've certainly had this messaging from my GP when I was in like got into my mid 40s, and they were like, "Oh, well, your mum had heart disease, your dad's had a stroke, you're high risk." Is that true?
In most cases, no. I will say
Okay.
yes, there are a minority of familial, genetic disorders that you may get, obviously from your parents, but things like high cholesterol. Well, there's familial hypercholesterolemia, but that only affects 1 in 250 people. So it's pretty rare that you're going to have that. I think what most people do get from their parents are habits,
Mm,
good or bad. Like, you grow up in a household, I was Italian American, so we had a lot of pasta, a lot of breads and that kind of thing. So I inherited those habits, and a lot of people inherit practices and traditions, I would say, more than actual diseases from their family. So to that point, you're not a victim if your parent died of a disease or if they had dementia, doesn't mean you're going to get it. This, based on studies, we now know about 80% of your longevity is under the control of your lifestyle. So let's say 20% roughly. Some people say 10, some people say 30. I would just say to think in big numbers, like 20% of your lifespan, the quality of your life may be genetic, but you have a big control over that 80%. So this is where epigenetics comes in. Like if you're eating well, you're not smoking, you maintain a good body weight, you're not drinking alcohol, you can control the expression of those genes. And maybe you were dealt a bad genetic hand, but you can control how that hand is played out, so to speak, by eating well and sleeping and reducing stress and so on. So that's how I would respond to that. Like don't feel that you're bound to get whatever disease that your parents or grandparents may have succumbed to.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I told my GP at the time. I was like, think I'm okay. Like my lifestyle is completely different to my parents. So and yeah, I was pretty happy with where I was at. So I'm glad that you've affirmed that for us.
Well, the saying is genetics loads the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, you talked about heart disease, coronary artery disease, and that's one of the biggest killers. But you also just mentioned dementia. Before we get stuck into like some of the practices that you recommend that can help people to improve their lifestyles, I just want to kind of bring it to people's attention. Like these are the things that we can prevent. So heart disease, but dementia, is that something that is a lifestyle related disease?
Dementia is one of the, I'd say, top 4 chronic diseases that are the top killers probably here in the US and
Okay.
in the world. And yes, there is a component of that might be genetic and people can get their ApoE, alleles checked. But you can with lifestyle control how that's going to be expressed or how early you might, let's say, succumb to Alzheimer's by exercise, by nutrition, by sleep, and all the other lifestyle changes I mentioned earlier. Absolutely, you're not at the mercy of your genes. Like, well, I'm going to get Alzheimer's, nothing I can do. For example, exercise is very well known to increase the size of your hippocampus, which is an area of the brain responsible for memory. So whether that's cardio training, whether this is resistance training, you can improve that. Dementia is felt to be, it's called type 3 diabetes. This is poor metabolic control of our blood sugars. So if you can control your blood sugars and not develop, say, type 2 diabetes and later in life, and maybe you're eating more whole foods and you're not eating these refined sugars where you're going to have high blood sugars running, you can, let's say, prevent or maybe just delay the onset, maybe that's a better way to say it, of Alzheimer's. So yeah, I absolutely think you can control that. And along with dementia, I mentioned type 2 diabetes and even some cancers you can control with exercise, with proper diet. And of course, heart disease is the first one. And those are probably the top 4, let's say, chronic diseases that, at least in America, are the cause of like most deaths that people, barring accidental injuries, overdoses, car accidents. Those are kind of what we're talking about really, is how do we prevent chronic disease? And it's funny that if you do these lifestyle basics of eating mostly whole foods, let's say more plants than meat, if you're exercising, sleeping, well, that's going to treat all of the chronic diseases, it's not just like a heart diet or a diabetes diet or a dementia diet. They're all kind of similar.
Let's get into this, the pyramid. So in your online course, you've created a pyramid that helps us to determine where we need to start and some of the things that can help to contribute towards improving our lifestyle and taking control of our health span, our health and our health span. You've just mentioned the top 3, although they're at the base of the pyramid: nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Out of those 3, what would you say is the number 1, and how would you go about approaching that with someone?
Yeah, it's a hard question to rank those three. So again, if you visualize the pyramid, you say, okay, here's the base of it: nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Um, what you'd like to think, are they all equally important? I guess I would say this: sleep might be the most important, because think about it. How long can you go without eating? Well, you could go several days. You could go many days without exercising. How long can you go without sleeping? One day, 2 days, you're ruined, right? You cannot
It can kill you, right?
perform. Right, it could kill you. I think on record, the longest person may went 11 days and died. So you could go weeks and weeks, right, without eating, generally speaking, and many people go months without exercise. But
Lifetime.
yeah, but no, I would say sleep is probably the most underestimated. It probably gets the least respect. It is getting more attention these days. Like Matthew Walker, there's a great
Yeah.
book out there. He has a podcast. And I think if people even focused on that and they said, well, I want to optimize my sleep, I want to protect it, I want to get 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep, what you'll find is you're better able to perform in exercise, you're better able to be more productive in work, you'll make better food decisions, and those better food decisions will lead to better performance and exercise. And if you exercise, then you're going to sleep better. It's all sort of interrelated. But yeah, if you ask me, I guess I would say sleep is the most important. But I guess I should say that they're equal um, along the base of that, and not to dive too deep into each one. Like in the course, we go into these in a lot more depth. But nutrition, try to eat mostly whole foods, single ingredient foods. Try to optimize your protein intake. Most people are under eating protein. Try to eat about a gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. Try to eat about 30 grams of fiber a day. Most people I know in America are way under eating fiber. They're not even close. And that 25 to 30 grams is the minimum. And I think it's like 2 to 3% of Americans are hitting that. Try to eat a couple fermented foods a day. This is good, right, for the microbiome. Exercise. Most people aren't doing enough strength training, right? We now know, or now learning, right? Having more muscle mass leads to a longer life. The more muscle you have, the longer you'll live and the better you'll live. So weight training 2 to 4 times a week, the steady state cardio, so-called zone 2 cardio, maybe an hour of that a week. And then maybe you're doing some sprinting or high intensity in there. If I could only pick one there, weight training. For longevity and for weight management as well, for weight loss. And then the sleep, I mentioned that before, but I think most people, because they're on their tablets, they're on their phones, they're on their computers, they're watching TV late at night, this disruption in their circadian rhythm is really a big cause of a lot of the disease that we have, the chronic disease, the weight gain that we see, and which leads to other things, type 2 diabetes. I think if we could I wear like these blue blocker glasses at night. I've been wearing them for maybe 7 or 8 years now. Try to go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. But not to go too far into each one, I think that's where I would begin with someone. And the course tries to walk someone through that. Like you could almost create your own longevity blueprint of sorts. And then moving up that pyramid, I'd say, well, which diagnostic tests should you get based on your age or your family history? And we talked about the test for cardiac disease. I would say number 2 killer is cancer. Think about maybe a full body MRI. Kind of expensive. It's not covered by insurance, but it can detect tumors at an early stage. Here in America, they're about $2,500. You could also get a blood test it's called a Gallery blood test. And this is a test that screens for 50 types of cancer. And these are cancers that are not traditionally screened for, like breast cancer with mammograms and colonoscopies for colon cancer. And that's great. And you should do that. But there are things that you could do, beyond that. And there's other forms of testing, genetic testing and things like that, but I won't go too deep into it. But that's sort of the base of that pyramid. And then the next level up would be, let's rule out things that could kill us, which would be heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, dementia, and try to minimize those things.
So so we've got the nutrition, exercise, and sleep at the bottom. And by the way, I reckon sleep would be pretty important too. I always say that it's like the most underrated thing, and the thing that we will always sacrifice for the sake of trying to get more done. But it's just like the cornerstone of everything. When we've slept well, not only are we having all those regenerative processes that happen during a good quality sleep, but it makes us more motivated. We can think clearer. So we're going to make better choices when it comes to our nutrition and exercise as well. So yeah, sleep is like, I'm a bit of a sleep Nazi.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And the one thing I didn't mention, certainly to your audience, if you are on this journey of like losing fat, building muscle, and improving your body composition, that fat loss happens in your sleep. And muscle building happens, growth hormones released in your sleep, and specifically in your deep sleep, which is happening between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So it's really important to be asleep before midnight because those hours sort of count more, so to speak. So you'd hate to be working out in the gym, having a great diet, and you're sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night. You're just undermining all your efforts outside of sleep. So I thought I would just add that to underscore, yes, the importance of sleep as foundational to your health.
And not to mention the fact that you'd probably tap into more of a stress response if you're not getting enough sleep. And we release different hormones. The hunger hormones get out of whack as well, don't they, as part of our circadian.
Yeah, all the hormones will get dysregulated, cortisol, melatonin, leptin, so many things when your sleep is off. And again, you mentioned circadian. Yeah, our light dark cycles are completely deranged, and that's really adding to poor sleep, which is adding to poor health.
The diagnostic testing, that's the next level up.
Yeah.
If there was, do you recommend across the board, like you said, if you can afford it, potentially getting a whole body scan, blood tests for like seeing if you're at higher risk of cancer, heart disease? Are there any other specific blood tests that you would say these are the benchmark tests that someone should get done, or is it really a case by case, or what you feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I think depending if you have symptoms or you're at higher risk, let's say, for something based on your current lifestyle, smoking, high blood pressure, obesity, I would say, cardiac disease is number one killer. A lot of people are giving attention to your lipid panels. Now, most people in America, they'll just get like a regular lipid panel. But what you could do and request is an expanded lipid panel where they're looking at particle size and they're looking at the number of lipid particles you have. And a lot of people are talking about ApoB, apolipoprotein B. This is a type of protein that carries cholesterol in it. So most people know like LDL is bad cholesterol and say HDL is good. And it's good to know those, but it's not as valuable as knowing how many LDL particles do you have? What are the size of them? Are they big? Are they small? You want to have bigger particles and a smaller number of particles. And you can get that in a simple blood test. There's one called a Cardio IQ panel that's done by a Quest. LabCorp has one. It's called an NMR panel. And these will give you and your doctor a much better look at your cholesterol instead of just saying, here's my total, here's my HDL, and here's my LDL. So like ApoB is something you follow because all the particles and the cholesterol carried in ApoB are the ones that are more likely to cause clots and to cause plaques. So I guess from a cardiac standpoint, I would go there. From a metabolic standpoint, in America, most people just look at glucose, or they might do a hemoglobin A1C now. It's becoming more popular. This gives like a 3-month snapshot into what's your blood sugar been for the last 90 days. But what most people don't test is a fasting insulin. But your glucose could be normal for decades before it gets abnormal. And by that point, it might be too late. Whereas if you could look at a fasting insulin, which is one of the blood tests I check on patients in my program to see where they're at. And if your insulin is very high, this is a sign that you already have type 2 diabetes. When your insulin's high, you cannot burn fat. And these patients are stuck and they're storing fat. So like if you wake up in the morning, your insulin should be very, very low. It shouldn't be at a high number. So that's one other thing to look at. Metabolic. I mentioned the Gallery test for screening for cancer. Those are a few just that come to mind if we're thinking about the top killers, which is say metabolic disease, cancer, heart disease, and then other tests sort of based on, a case by case basis. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of the continuous glucose monitor as a way of assessing your insulin response and your blood sugar?
I think it's a good tool if someone wants to use it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months to see how they respond to certain foods, or even certain activities, or when they're eating at certain times a day. I think it's great. I think if you have a history of type 2 diabetes, or you're metabolically off, or you have other symptoms, you have brain fog, you have fatigue, I think it's something worth looking into and talking to your doctor about. I know here in America, a lot of people are starting to use them, like a lot of non-diabetics, a lot of like athletes and performance. I think it gives you more information. And I think, again, like an Oura ring tells you about sleep, or you're counting your steps. I think it's nice. I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's a nice addition to someone who's really trying to dial in, how do I respond to carbs? How do I respond to proteins and fats and things like that?
Yeah, cool. The testing that you have talked about, are there things that sometimes, I mean, I don't know exactly how it works and how it compares in the US and Australia, like some standard tests that your doctors will suggest, some tests that you can request from your doctor, but there's also now you can request tests without a GP. Is there any are there any limitations with when you can request your own compared to going to a GP, or are you basically able to access any of those kind of tests through independent?
You could request them through your doctor, but if it's not covered under your health insurance plan, it might not be covered. But you alluded to, there are independent companies out there where you can do an at-home blood test. Some are finger sticks, some you go into a lab, like here the common ones are Quest and LabCorp, where they'll draw your blood and send you the results. Those are becoming more and more popular because I think people are trying to take more control of this, and they're like, well, my doctor isn't going to check my fasting insulin, or I'm not going to get an expanded lipid panel, so I'm just going to, I might pay $100 or $200 and just get this done. I myself, I've been working with a company, it's called Life Force. I don't know if you've heard of it. This is a company, Tony Robbins works with several longevity doctors on this company, and what they've created is a system where they'll come to my office, they draw my blood every 3 months, and then I review those labs with one of their physicians via telehealth. And it's a very comprehensive blood panel. It's expanded lipids, it's hormones, it's thyroid, vitamin D. It's really comprehensive. And then I get this opportunity to review those. But the fact that I'm looking at that every 3 months, then we can make little tweaks and changes and add things and subtract things. And I think that trend is becoming more popular. Unfortunately, it's just not, a lot of it isn't covered by health insurance yet. So there are limitations there, but I think
be prepared to invest in doing it yourself.
You have to be prepared a little bit, and you have to just be proactive and just talk to your doctor, find out, say, what does my plan cover? What can we get? And I would say the lipid one is like the most important one to know, again, because it's the number one cause of death here.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's move up the pyramid. Social connection and stress management. I'm surprised this doesn't come before the diagnostic testing, but I'm not here to assess your
not to say that social connection isn't important. I think I put the test there because sort of the saying is, you don't want to die of something
Yeah.
stupid, so to
Yeah.
speak,
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that
Yeah. I get
you
it.
could rule out.
Yeah.
So I put that there because there's one thing, you could have everything else in line and you're like, hey,
Yes.
I want to live to be 100, but you have this tumor that you didn't see that could have been detected, let's just say.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so not to undermine like social connection and stress, right? We've learned so much about the blue zones in the
Mm.
world, right? Where people are living to be 100 with a lot more frequency than other parts of the world. And what do these places have in common? They have strong social connections. They have a faith base or religion base. They volunteer a lot. They have communities or these tribes where they help out each other when someone becomes sick. And I think it's something that unfortunately technology has hurt us a little bit, especially in like younger adults or teens. Like technology has caused almost more social isolation.
Mm.
And people are like, they say social media, but people are sitting in their basement and they're gaming, let's say, or they're playing video games and they're not having that social connection, which is a part of having a thriving life. So, I mean, the people who live to be 100, they're not doing it alone. Let's
Right.
just say that. I mean, I guess you could find someone who's 100 hiding out in their basement somewhere, but that's unusual or rare. And, along with that, yeah, they're trying to lead more of a stress-free life and, having community, eating together, um, being close to their family, um, going to church, going to, religious services together, contributing back to the community. All these things are helping. And they've done studies where this can help, lengthen your telomeres, right? Prevent the
Yeah.
telomeres of our genes from getting shorter. So lots of value there. And I think sometimes I guess it's viewed as like the softer science. And as you say, like maybe it should be lower on my pyramid, which is higher priority. But yeah, I sort of have that there. And I think it's critical and just
Yeah.
fostering the relationships we have, not having thousands of relationships, but the quality of your relationships, whether it's friends, family, coworkers, etc.
Yeah. Connection.
Yeah.
Stress management. Can you talk a little bit about stress? Like, because I feel like stress is a bit of a silent killer. What are some of the
Yeah.
impacts of stress and how can we manage them?
I think, there's different forms of stress, physical stress, mental, emotional stress. I think one thing I would think about is like our environment,
Mm.
the stressors in our environment,
Right.
without going into too deep into toxins and microplastics and mercury, heavy metal, mold. Like we have these constant and EMF, right? Electromagnetic frequency. We have all these stressors in our lives that we can take certain measures to limit them, whether that's an air purifier in your home, water filters, EMF blockers, or, taking measures like that. But yeah, you mentioned a silent killer. Yeah, certainly this stress leads to high blood pressure, leads to obesity. High stress leads to high cortisol levels. This is a hormone that leads to more visceral fat deposits in the abdomen, which leads to a host of other diseases. Autoimmune diseases leads to certain types of cancer, heart disease. And I think a lot of people, again, getting that 5 hours of sleep,
Mm.
that's a big stressor. We don't think of it that way. It's a huge stressor. And that's going to just flow into the rest of other parts of your life where you sleep 5 hours just because you need to work more and you have this deadline at work and you have to get something done. Well, your health is suffering. And I think people need to try to manage that. And, everyone has work and everyone has families and everyone has commitments, but you have to make, your health a priority. And you have to think of ways to reduce that stress, whether that's ironically exercise is a good way to reduce the stress, sleeping better, eating better. A lot of people do meditation. I think it's sometimes it can be a hard skill for people to learn, but it's something like anything you have to practice at that. Breath work, again, a skill, but people can do that to try to, minimize stress, journaling, things like that, practicing gratitude. I think there's a place for all of that. But some of the easier ones are like, yeah, let's filter the air and the water and some of these toxins. I think toxins are stress too,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
that's kind of how I would view it.
yeah, great. I love that because I think when we hear the word stress, it's easy just to think hard work and, trying to get too many things done. And we don't really think that toxins and chemicals and mold are stressors.
Right.
But they're a really huge contributing factor to stress on our system, aren't they? And how our body processes stress as well.
And as you mentioned, you said these are like silent killers because all
Mm,
those things are invisible. You
right.
don't think about the air, you don't think about electromagnetic
Yeah.
frequency. You just don't see it. So you're like, well, I'm okay. But
Yeah. Feel
there's all
okay.
it's like accumulating in our bodies. And again, unless you test for certain things, you'll never really know
Mm,
the degree of toxic burden, I guess you'd say,
yeah.
that we all have.
I want to move up to the next part of the pyramid, but I just curious if there's anything that you do to reduce EMFs in
I do.
your
I
environment.
have a blocker. I have two of these EMF blockers, one at home and one on my phone. It's on the
Uh-huh.
back of it and on my tablet. It's from a company I have no affiliation with. It's called Aries,
Yeah.
AIRES, Aries Tech, and I've been using it for a year or so. It's like a little
Yeah.
disc. It's the size of a nickel. It goes on the back of your phone or your computer, and it helps block the frequencies. And I'll put my phone on airplane mode most of
Hmm.
the time,
Yeah.
especially if I'm charging it. Try not to keep the phone next to your head. Ideally keep the phone out of your bedroom at night and try not to sleep with your head next to your Wi-Fi router.
Sure.
Some people would suggest turning off the Wi-Fi at night. I guess those are some measures there. Um, but no, yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing. I
Yeah.
live in a big city, here in Los Angeles. It's hard. I live in a high rise and I work in an office building, so I'm constantly bombarded with it. So you try to do what you can.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, and just having an awareness around it, I guess, and doing, as you said, doing what you can is important. I'm
Yeah.
super curious about supplements and alternative therapies, which is up towards the top of the pyramid. So I think that this is interesting because this is the place where often people will potentially go first.
Right.
And you're like, no, no, no. Let's get all of these other things dialed in, and then let's talk about supplements and alternative therapies, which I think is yeah, really important actually, because we think that we're going to get the solutions that we're after through those external things, those supplements and alternative therapies. But they're
Yeah,
always
and I'll
going to
get
have the best impact, aren't they? Sorry, they're always going to have the best impact when you've got all of those other things dialed in.
you're exactly right. When you have, the base of the pyramid again, as we were talking about, the exercise, nutrition, the sleep, the stress, then these supplements will help you more.
Mm,
Or a cold plunge and hot sauna.
yeah.
I get so many questions. Patients come in, they're like, what about this peptide? Or I want to do an NAD infusion. Or what about this red light panel? But then you ask them, well, they're sleeping 5 hours a night, they're not eating well, and they don't exercise. Well, the supplements aren't going to save you from a poor lifestyle.
Right.
So, right now we're getting close to the top. I'm like, okay, let's say you're the person, you're doing all the right things. And when it does come to supplements, yeah, I think there's a role for them, and it could move the needle 1, 2, 3, 4%, let's say. And I guess my advice would be if you're deficient in something,
Mm,
that's probably something you need. Like, do you need vitamin D? Probably most Americans do, but you can there's easy blood tests for that. Same for magnesium, but sure, I'd recommend magnesium as a foundational supplement. Vitamin D3, I would recommend creatine for people for not only for muscle health, for cognitive brain health, 5 grams a day. Omega 3s,
uh-huh.
omega 3, most people, at least in America, most people aren't eating enough fatty fish. So I would supplement with a good quality fish oil, 2 or 3 grams, getting the DHA and the EPA, essential omega 3 fats that we need. And then maybe, a good, well-rounded, let's say a multivitamin. And maybe some whey protein if you're not hitting your protein
Yeah.
goals. I would sort of think of those as maybe, say, foundational supplements. And then you can experiment with other things. Like people are like, well, what about NAD or L-carnitine? Or, it's endless, right? You could take 20 or 30 supplements. But I think if you think of what you need and what your goals are, is it focus? Is it athletic performance? And sort of tailor it that way. But the foundational ones that I mentioned, I think can benefit like most people. As far as alternative therapies, again, yeah, there's a lot of value. Probably the most data is on hot saunas. You could reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease by what, like 50 or 60% if you're doing a hot sauna, say 4 to 7 times a week. And this comes from the data from Finland, right, where it's like commonplace to do it there. Cold plunge is popular. I think there's less data on it. I think it's coming out. I think it's fine. I don't know that it's going to extend your life to the degree hot saunas will. Maybe that data will come out in the future. And then other things like red light therapy is very popular. I use a red light machine almost every day, like 15 minutes in the morning. I think there's value for skin health to activate your mitochondria, right? Improve your mitochondrial health, cell energy. So I think there's value to that, but let's not skip the base of the pyramid. A lot of people like almost turn it upside down, like, hey, I'm going to do supplements and forget about sleep. So it's sort of that's the way I would kind of look at those alternative therapies, which a lot of people talk about the concept of hormesis, which is sort of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So, it's okay to be a little hungry, like fasting. It's okay to be a little hot or a little cold. And then your body will adapt and you'll become more resilient. So I think there's a role for those things. Like I personally don't do cold plunges. I do a cold shower at the end of my shower, and it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but it's good to be uncomfortable. You have to be uncomfortable in order to grow, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, some of the things you've just spoken about. One is you've mentioned that sauna is highly beneficial for people to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. However, I feel like the recommendation might oppose that. If for example, my dad has had a stroke quite some time ago, but he would be very averse to getting in a sauna because it sounds too risky, and that perhaps that messaging has been provided to him. Don't do anything that's stressful. What is your outlook on that sort of thing? Like recommending it to someone who already has a pre-existing condition?
Interestingly, you mentioned having had a stroke. Even in patients who may have heart disease, who let's say they don't have that aerobic capacity to exercise very much, studies have shown that hot saunas can sort of simulate, if you will, exercise. So I would maybe think about, after consulting with, your physician or your dad's physician, maybe going into the sauna for maybe just 5 minutes, maybe 6-8 minutes at a lower temperature, building your way up to, let's say, a lot of people go in there for 15 or 20 minutes, which I can do like that, 15, 18, it's hard. And then the temperature, like some would suggest it needs to be 170 or 180 Fahrenheit. Well, you don't have to. Like I also use at home like one of these sauna blankets where you get in and your head is outside of it. It's much more tolerable. So it's like an infrared sauna blanket, which might only get up to 140 Fahrenheit. So I think there are ways of sort of gradually dipping your toe, so to speak, into the hot sauna for the benefits of it, which are sort of simulating exercise, increasing blood flow, increasing nitric oxide, things like that. But you mentioned the stressor. Yeah, it's a stressor, but these stressors will help us to grow, but it's the dose, right?
Right.
You're going to start out with a short, brief exposure, whether it's cold, heat, or fasting, recover, then try it again. And maybe you go a little longer and you go a few more minutes in the hot sauna, or maybe at a higher temperature. And eventually you can build your way up to, let's say, the more optimal doses. But that's how I would think of stressors
Yeah.
like that. But certainly, if you have a history of heart disease, like there have been studies, people going to cold sauna, that can cause vasoconstriction, and that could be a
Yeah.
problem for someone's
Okay.
heart. So definitely consult with your doctor if you have a history of heart disease.
Cool. Thank you. You mentioned very briefly peptides, and I'm curious about this. This is something that I wouldn't say is mainstream in Australia. Like, we hear about a lot of the other supplements that you've talked about, but peptides, what role do you see? Can you explain what they are and what role do you see them playing? I know you can get them prescribed through independent, you know, sources here, with a consultation with a doctor. Yeah, but I don't think that they're widely used, but I do believe that they can be quite beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, certainly peptides, these are small amino acid sequences, like small chains of amino acids, which are like small, tiny proteins. You could think of it that way. And I'll give you an example, like insulin is a peptide.
Uh-huh.
Ozempic, right? Ozempic is a peptide. A lot of people are using all over the world, injecting themselves, right, to lose weight. So there's short-acting molecules that send signals throughout the body. And these are molecules that are already existing in our body. In the United States, most of these you don't need a prescription for. Very few are FDA approved because they're molecules in the body. And I don't think the FDA likes that because they can't really profit from these. So you can get them now online. I myself, I've bought or purchased a few of these online from a trusted sources where you can buy a peptide online. Most of these, by the way, are injections, a subcutaneous injection, let's say in the abdomen. There are some that are taken orally, some are nasal sprays, but most are injected. Some are daily, some are once a week. And a lot of people are using peptides depending on what their goals are. There are peptides to improve your cognition and your focus, brain function. There are peptides to improve muscle mass and to decrease body fat. Again, Ozempic with the body fat and Mounjaro. Some people are taking peptides to improve the quality of their skin. You could take peptides to help with sleep. So basically, it's almost this category of, it's somewhere, I guess you'd say, between a supplement and a drug.
Uh-huh.
It's an injectable, molecule, let's call it, that short acting, and it sends signals to your body as receptors in different parts of the body, whether it's going to the brain, the muscle, the heart, wherever, and it's going to perform a certain function. But they're very short acting, and most of them very, very safe because they'll only last like a day, most of
Oh,
them
wow.
in
Really?
in the body. Some have
Okay.
longer half lives, but they become quite popular here, let's say, for recovering from training, from sports, athletics, decreasing inflammation in the muscle, increasing, let's say, muscle mass. So instead of someone taking, let's say, steroids or growth hormone, you can take a peptide that signals your pituitary gland in your brain to release more natural growth hormone instead of taking exogenous, meaning out of the body growth hormone, which is going to, through negative feedback, shut down your body's normal growth hormone. So they're really interesting class, and I think honestly, it's probably the future of medicine, and it's going to be a big part of it. Is people doing this, and you just have to find a source, and it's a good source, like a company that you can trust. There's a lot of gray
Mm.
market out there where you don't really know where you're getting it from. There's some really good compounding pharmacies, and there's some pharmaceutical grade places that are making it. I don't know what it's like in Australia if you can buy them online, but I know in the US and I think in parts of Canada, a lot of people you're just buying them online without prescription.
Okay. I think that you can buy them online, but there needs to be some kind of like health check,
Okay.
and then it gets processed through a doctor that's associated with the company. I think that's how it works. All right. The top of the triangle. We're very close to the end of our conversation. So
Yeah.
the top of the pyramid, drugs, recommended drugs, is I've got it in small print here, so I'm kind of squinting to see it on my screen. So it's right at the top, but it's the last port of call, you would say. And is this
Yeah.
prescription medications that you're referring to?
Yeah. Pharmacologic interventions. For
Mm,
example, if you have high risk and you have a lot of coronary artery disease, you might need to lower your LDL or your ApoB, so-called bad cholesterol, to prevent a cardiac event. And there's a lot of data out there saying that if you lower your LDL, you can lower your risk of heart disease. There's a lot of conflicting data where people are like, nah, cholesterol is not a problem. But look, in my case, I have this. I have recently instituted a very low dose statin just because of my level of risk. And I recently had another test of my neck. It's a scan. It's called the CIMT test, carotid intima media thickness test, that tells you if you have soft plaques or hard plaques, which is a predictor of what's happening in your heart as what's happening in your neck. So there are some cases where if you want to just reduce your risk, I'm all in favor. If you need to be on that, if you need to be on, a drug for diabetes, like let's not forget Ozempic and all those are type 2 diabetes drugs, which are now used for weight loss. I'd almost put in that category maybe stem cells too, stem cells to, maybe reverse an injury, for back pain, for nerve pain, for, things like that, which again, not many are FDA approved. You can go to a stem cell clinic. Most people are going out of the US. They're going to Panama or Mexico or somewhere where it's more readily available. But yeah, at the top of the pyramid, I put, pharmacological interventions there, because I think everything else below that can maybe in most cases do 90 or 95% of the movement and the change in your life. Some people would say, well, a baby aspirin a day can help prevent colon cancer and prevent, cardiac events. But yeah, that's where I have it there. And not to say the top of the pyramid means it's the least important or the smallest, but to show that everything below it, lifestyle wise, is more important and maybe more impactful. But there are people who look, if you need a drug for your heart, then so be it. You have to in certain cases.
Yeah. If someone is taking medications as their first port of call, and then they come to decide that they want to do the lifestyle, all of the lifestyle stuff that's in the rest of the pyramid, can they then reduce the amount of pharmaceutical intervention
Yeah, like
they're having?
for example, if someone is on, let's say you're on a blood pressure medication, your
Yeah.
blood pressure is very high, but you're overweight and you're not sleeping and you're not eating right, you could potentially get off of that blood pressure medicine. I see patients who are on like 3 blood pressure medications. Well, maybe we can get you down to 1, or maybe we could get you off, there's some oral, agents people take for type 2 diabetes. Although most people are taking Ozempic now. Yes, you can get people off certain medications by correcting these other chronic diseases, because I didn't mention this really earlier, most of these chronic diseases, most of them are preventable. But in the US, most of our funding and money goes towards treating the symptoms, right? Spending what, 4 or 5 trillion a year. We're not really getting at the root cause. And the root cause really seems to be lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. You've been so generous with everything that you've shared today. I'm just, as I said, I'm conscious that we've kind of hit our hour, but just as we do head towards our close, I think that many people would probably think, well, you had a great career. You have a great career as a plastic surgeon. Why is this so important for you right now? You've got your online course. You're supporting people in their lifestyles. What's the driving force behind this?
Yeah, just trying to reach more people, trying to help more people with this message that it's something that everyone can do. Like you could start today or tomorrow and say, yeah, what? I am going to walk for 15 minutes after dinner. I am going to try to increase my steps. Maybe I'm going to start lifting weights. And that's going to prevent things. Because I think, at least, again, in the United States, there is not a focus on prevention. We're very good. We have great acute care. We can treat trauma and late stage disease and heart attacks, but we're not very good at early stage. And I think if you can reach people maybe in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and give them a much longer health span, right? A better health span. Like in the United States, most people, they make it to their early 60s and then they spend their last 15 to 20 years in poor health. So they might live to be 78, but the last 15 years is very low quality. But whereas we now know we can improve that health span and lengthen it so you live quality years into your 70s, 80s, and hopefully 90s, and not have this period of debilitation that lasts for a decade or longer. So you can live to be 100 and be in good health. And, people are doing that. So, and I love plastic surgery still, and, I always will. But I think this is sort of in tandem with that. And I try to help my plastic surgery patients, like, just to be healthier, because a lot of them are, middle life or in 40s. And although they want to do something aesthetic to look better, they kind of should be thinking about how can I live longer, live to see my kids and my grandkids and, so on. So I think that's where the passion comes from, is just helping people as a physician, even before I'm a plastic surgeon.
Yeah. How old do you want to live to? Do you have a number on it?
No, I don't have a number on it. I just want to, again, back to the health span versus lifespan, just a good quality of life. And the older you get, the more you think, well, 57 is not that old. And I think when I was a child, I'm like, wow, that seemed old. But as you get older, you think, well, you feel younger and just have the capacity to do more, live more. And I sort of tell patients, it's not about just looking better, it's about feeling better and living longer. I mean, you can do all those things primarily through lifestyle changes. So, I don't have a number. I just want to have a good quality of life.
Love it. Thank you. Brilliant. I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to sharing this with our audience. Oh, final note. We're going to share all of your information in the guest directory, so people will be able to find you there and access your online course. Is there anything you want to say about that just as we do close?
No, my website, it's williambrunomd.com, and that's my plastic surgery website, but I have a wellness tab there, and that's where the 2 ebooks are, the free ebooks, and the course is there. There's a little webinar. Patients can watch it for free and just get a sense for what the course is like. And then the coaching program, they can reach out to me through that, or I'm fairly active on Instagram and also at William Bruno MD. But if someone's interested in that or just has a question, they can send a direct message via Instagram. I usually respond to those myself. But I just tell people, take action. Whether it's anything through me or anywhere else, like a lot of times people hear a podcast like this and like, oh, that sounds interesting, but they don't do anything. And I think if you make one small change, whether it's steps, whether it's, starting a new exercise program, that's the way to longevity. Don't rely on technology or expensive interventions. It's really simple things that we can do on our own.
Great. Amazing. Thank you. Loved it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I've really appreciated your time.